The universal sign of we can go, right. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the Asia Society Hong Kong Center. My name is Alejandro Reyes. I'm a scholar in residence here at the Asia Society Hong Kong Center. Good afternoon, bonjour, buenas tardes, salam alaikum, salam, kamal chobat, namaste, bula ago akwava, bawani, kedu, hujambo. Did I cover all the languages? I think so, I hope so, of our representatives here, but maybe there are many more than and I also might have double upped on languages in Nigeria. They have so many. But anyway, first of all, allow me to thank Alice Mong and her team here at Asia Society, particularly Holly Smith, who's at the back, for organizing this session with the AsiaGlobal Fellows at the University of Hong Kong. First of all, let me introduce and call to the stage my friend Casey Kwok, who is the director of the Asia Global Fellows Program, to just give us a few welcoming remarks. Casey?
Thank you, Al. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad that we could have this occasion to work together with the Asia Society Hong Kong Center to launch this event. I'm at the University of Hong Kong at an institute called the Asia Global Institute. And we run this Asia Global Fellows program. This is actually the 6th or 7th year when we run this program, depending on how you count as 1 year, because there was a few years when COVID affected how we run the program. But the whole idea of the Asia Global Fellows program is that we bring together to Hong Kong a group of on average, about 15 fellows every year from different countries, from different professional backgrounds. They are typically mid-career professionals and executives. Some are working in the government, some are working in the private sector, some are entrepreneurs, some are working in the civil society sector. So they come from all different backgrounds, and we bring them to Hong Kong. We produce a program to enable them to understand Hong Kong, China, Asia a lot better. And in the process, they also get together and mingle. And so in the process, they network with not only amongst themselves, with a diversity of views and backgrounds, as well as network and mingle with different stakeholders in Hong Kong, in China, in other cities in Asia. This year, for example, we also went for a study trip in Bangkok, Thailand. The whole purpose of this is that we want the rest of the world to understand Asia more. So I guess we have a lot of commonality with the Asia Society. When we discussed with the Asia Society, we quickly came up with this idea that, well, now since we are now in the middle, well, actually we're in the later stage of this program now, the fellows of this year's cohort will graduate next week. And we therefore take the opportunity and leveraging on the presence of so many fellows in Hong Kong, we put together this program. So you are going to hear the views from different countries, the fellows with different backgrounds about some of the most important issues the world is facing today. And since many of our fellows come from the global south countries, so this is why we have this event today. I'll let Al and Christine later on to introduce the speakers, so I won't take up too much of the time here. But I hope this gives you a rough idea. Oh, by the way, we have been running this for the past 6-7 years. Altogether, we have now got about 73 fellows coming from 43 countries. When we add all these cohorts together, we think this is a very good network, not only amongst the fellows themselves, but also for Hong Kong. We have now a group of Hong Kong U alumni in many parts of the world. And if any of you are interested to connect with us, please let us know. Thank you.
Casey, could you say something about the age led to 15 at Asia Society, Asia Global just mentioned that?
Oh, yeah. We also have these fellows talking. Oh, actually, let me take one step back. As I mentioned earlier on, we have already run this program for 6-7 years. We have now get a group of alumni in different parts of the world, and this year we are going to have a homecoming for past alumni. And I think so far 16 of them have agreed to come back. So together with the 18 fellows in the current cohort, we will have about 34 people coming from different parts of the world. And we therefore also take the opportunity to run 2 forums in the University of Hong Kong, leveraging on the presence of existing fellows and past fellows from different countries. And based on the commonalities amongst the fellows, we're going to have 2 forums. One on African development in the face of an increasingly multipolar world. The second forum will be on philanthropy developments, particularly in Asia, given that we have a number of fellows who work on this area, philanthropy-related areas. Philanthropy, of course, is an industry that is going through a lot of changes because of societal changes, economic changes, technological changes, so on and so forth. So we will have an opportunity to discuss this using specific examples from different countries, but also look into the commonalities and opportunities for collaboration or for working together and so on. So it will be in the Hong Kong U. If you are interested, you all are welcome at the AsiaGlobal Institute's office in the main building, the most historic building in the University of Hong Kong.
November 15th.
Yeah.
November 15th.
Right, right.
What time?
In the morning.
Okay.
Basically the whole morning.
Right, right. Great.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
We must never miss an opportunity to promote these events, right? We cannot. I mean, otherwise, Anyway, I have views on that, but I'll keep them to myself. All right. Let me just see if I can get my notes back on. So let me welcome as many of the fellows as are here. I think we're not a complete set. They'll probably be trickling in. And I would like to recognize the Deputy Consul General of Egypt, who's kindly joined us. I don't see my colleague, Christine Lowe. I would have recognized her, but I don't think she's in the house at the moment. And I would also like to give a welcome to Ambassador Donald Bobiash, who's Executive Director for Canada at the Asian Development Bank in Manila, ADB, and my old boss. So there we go. So the session is Voices from the Global South. The running program is this. We'll start with a discussion on geopolitics, countries at the nexus of great power conflict. And then I will moderate that session. And then we'll have a short break. And then Christine Lowe, as I mentioned, my colleague Christine Lowe, whom most of you will know, she will moderate a second session, also with 4 fellows, on sustainability challenges in the Global South. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to call up the fellows, the AsiaGlobal Fellows who will participate in this first session. And I'll introduce them briefly. I'm sorry, I've curtailed their bios, extensive bios. I won't take too much time. But as I call your name, do you mind taking your place? First, Mohammed Ibrahim Hafez. Mo is a policy expert specializing in foreign direct investment, special economic zones, and regionalism within the Middle East and North Africa region. He presently holds the position of policy advisor at the General Authority for Investment and Free Zones in Egypt, having previously worked as a corporate credit analyst at Qatar National Bank. His research as an AsiaGlobal Fellow, because each AGF, each fellow has to do a research project whilst they're here. So his research will investigate the geographical, because you should have already been working at it very hard, investigates the geographical, economic, political, and social dimensions of SEZs in the region to see how these elements interact and forge a comprehensive network of economic, political, and social relationships. Then we have Nona Mamulashvili. Nona She is a former member of the Parliament of Georgia. That was from 2020 to 2023, and currently a co-founder of Gamziri Civic Platform in Georgia. She's also a chairwoman of the Caucasus Economic Policy Institute, a think tank that promotes structural change and institutional development through policy research and advocacy in the Caucasus and Central Asia. Nona is simultaneously the president of the Georgian Swiss Business Association and vice president of the Women Business Association. She was a non-resident fellow at Middle East Institute and the Rumsfeld Foundation. Previously, she worked as the regional director for Pfizer, covering Caucasus and Central Asian countries. She also has extensive experience working in the public sector and was senior advisor to the analytical group of the president of Georgia in 2005 to 07, as well as political analyst at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Georgia at a later stage. Her research, I don't know, because you're in a kind of betwixt between, yes, I think, but you were researching the importance of public-private dialogue for economic development. Then my pleasure to introduce Prasoon Sharma. Prasoon is a CEO of Pradivya Software Pvt Limited. He has worked in and traveled to more than 20 countries, including the UK, China, Indonesia, and has 15 years of global experience in corporate planning, handling government relationships and strategic planning, successful planning, and achieving country regional sales targets. Prasoon facilitated a $6 billion investment from China and created $450 million worth of projects in the Indian smart city and e-governance domain. His research focus as an AsiaGlobal Fellow has been to find synergies among Asian countries to establish an Asian Silicon Valley. That's a tall task. And finally, for this session, Anna Tuiketai, I probably mispronounced that, but Anna is an international lawyer and arbitrator that is the first listed Pacific Council with the International Criminal Court, The Hague. She was elected to the ICC Bar Association General Assembly, to the Defense and Membership Committee, another first for the Pacific, and by Pacific meaning the Pacific Islands. She is also the only female Pacific Islander listed as an arbitrator with the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Lausanne, Switzerland, the Shenzhen Court of International Arbitration, China, and the South China International Arbitration Center here in Hong Kong. She's admitted to the Tongan and Fijian Bar. She is hoping to be admitted to the US New York Bar in 2023. And this is, in my mind, the thing that sticks in my head all the time is she is the only Fijian female accredited World Rugby judicial officer and educator, and the only Oceania International Rugby League independent chair. What an achievement, I tell you. In 2017, she was awarded the Medal of the Order of Fiji for her work with Fijian women and youth. So this is our panel. It's okay, right, great. So let me just frame the discussion to start. I was just at the China-US Exchange Foundation conference over at the St. Regis, and they're discussing, of course, the US-China relationship. And one of the things that I found quite interesting is the talk of how when you're discussing the US-China relationship, it's not just about the US and China, but there are a lot of stakeholders in that relationship, be it countries that might benefit from one side or the other, or even benefit from the clash between the two. There are many countries that might be disadvantaged because of the clash between the US and China. And there are stakeholders in both sides. So it's not necessarily just about the two countries. Indeed, I like to talk about what I call the caught in the middle countries. And these are generally everybody else. And the agency that these countries can exercise, right? Because when you think about whether we're in a unipolar world or a bipolar world, or what have you, a multipolar world, in some ways it's not necessarily about the two big poles, the US and China. Yes, it's about their relationship, their domestic politics that are fueling the rivalry. But it's also about all the countries kind of caught in the middle, and what is their agency? What is their ability to choose for themselves? Because while the China and the US say, we're not making anybody choose, let's make no mistake about it, that countries often and will have to choose. And so how do they do that? Now, what is the latitude for countries to choose, right? So when you think about agency, I've been working on trying to measure that agency. How can you assess that agency, right? And there are many factors. What is their relationship with China? What's the relationship with the US? What is, in fact, their geographic distance from either country, the extent of their trade, the extent of their cultural connections, even the political system, domestic political system, what's the ideology, the values, et cetera, that underpin a particular economy or country, and how does that, do they have more affinities with the United States or with China in that regard? So values can come into it, right? And so the question of agency then redounds on the issue of, well, how do you hinge? How well, what latitude does a country have to hinge from the US or China, right? Can you hinge both ways? And I think we'll probably learn that India, in some ways, is a country that is trying to master, if not already mastering, the kind of hinging of both ways. But a country like Canada, it's so close geographically to the United States that its hinging latitude, its ability to hinge is somewhat limited, right? A country like the Philippines, which has a mutual defense treaty with the United States, again, may try to hinge between that kind of economic opportunities that China might represent versus the strategic guarantees offered by the United States. But yet, because of that strategic connection to the United States, Manila might have not that much latitude, and then it will rely so much on its strategic guarantees with the United States that it might limit its ability to take advantage of what economic opportunities China might offer. And also, of course, there is the South China Sea issue that creates a problem. So the way countries react, you can either cringe, as I put it, you can kind of recoil from this idea of having to choose. You can complain about it, you can whinge, right? And Singapore is known as having said, please don't make us choose, right? So you can whinge about it. Or you can binge, the way I put it is that you can go all hog one way, and maybe a country like Pakistan, which got very much into the opportunities that Chinese investment gave, or a country like Zambia or what have you, that they get so much into the opportunities offered, the economic opportunities offered by China, that maybe their ability to govern or to monitor the levels of debt that they might get into has created a lot of problems. So you can binge on one side or the other, or you can try to master the hinging. And that's kind of where we're at here for our discussion. We want to kind of understand how the countries on this panel, and maybe the region, are hinging. How well can they hinge? So we have Egypt, we have Georgia, we have India, and we have Fiji, which I think is a fantastic selection of countries with which to have this discussion. Because the issue of agency is not necessarily a matter of your size of the country. You may be a very small country, but you might actually have a great deal of agency because of your strategic position or what a particular country might want from you. So I've always bring up always the issue, the example of Guyana in South America, where you had a country that looked to China significantly as a market for its natural resources, but is it within the American sort of sphere of security, so they need to have good relations with the United States. And then in 2015, it found large reserves of petroleum in its territory. So it became much sought after by both sides. And a tiny little country like Guyana, in some ways, becomes an important hinge country, even though it's very small, right? So, with that kind of preamble, let me turn first to Mohammed, who's over at the end. We're going to start with you, Mohammed, because really uppermost on many people's minds at the moment is the Israel-Hamas war. And of course, Egypt will play a very important role in, well, we're trying to resolve it or dealing with it or how it plays out. And Egypt is a kind of interesting hinge country because, of course, it has a strong relationship with the United States, but also has a very strong relationship with China, particularly going back to recognition when China stood up in 1949 and all of and those affinities that have lasted those long years. So how do you see it then, particularly in the context of the conflict that we're seeing? How do you see how Egypt is kind of, I don't want, for want of a better word, playing the situation, dealing with this particular situation that we're in, given its relationships with the United States and China?
First of all, thank you for having us and thanks for your kind introduction. And as you mentioned, indeed, Egypt has been a key player in the Middle East and North Africa region. Egypt is a large country and is the most populous country in the Middle East and the third in Africa. Nowadays, it has a very stable political and security environment, and its foreign policy relies mainly on maintaining balance in its relationship with the great power, either China or the United States, with also working more in developing economic opportunities and on economic fronts, and at the same time, like all the nations safeguarding its national interest. One major topic I would like to shed the light on that in the past decade, China and Egypt has been, the relationship between China and Egypt has been growing significantly stronger, very strong, and it mainly depends on three main pillars. First, political alignment. China and Egypt share same perspective on most of the international aspects, and they often align their voices in the United Nations Security Council and the other platform with each other. And this conversion of agreements on political opinions deepen the ties between both countries. The second, the military cooperation, because Egypt has the largest and strongest military in the Middle East according to the Global Firepower Index. And recently, China has provided Egypt with advanced military tools and equipment, and even both militaries of both nations have exercised the joint military exercises with each other, and this also deepen the ties between the military of both nations. Finally, most importantly, also the economic aspect, because China has emerged as a major investment and trading partner to Egypt. China has become the largest trading partner for Egypt, with a bilateral trade balance of 19.2 billion last year, and one of the largest investor in many different sectors. I would name the infrastructure, and the Chinese government working closely with the Egyptian government to develop industrial park within the special economic zone of Suez Canal. So this is strategic partnership between Egypt and China, and Egypt and US keeps Egypt as a strategic partner that promotes a mutual interest and address common challenges with the global power. And actually, to put the things into its right context, it's not Israeli-Hamas conflict. It's Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it didn't emerge on 7th of October last month. It started 75 years ago in 1947 when the United Nations, led by the United States and Western power, decided to give 48% in the resolution number 181 to the Israeli part, and since then the conflict takes many different shapes across the years, and definitely this is the big elephant now in the Middle East room, and it imposes different risks on not only on Egypt but in all the regions, in all the countries in the region.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how, because exercising agency is a very complex issue for any country's leaders. Domestic politics is a big factor, right? The kind of leeway a government might have, the type of government you might have. It's more authoritarian in Egypt. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that. How has Egypt's ability to choose for itself, in fact, from what you've said, seemingly drift closer to China in recent years, particularly economically, given its strong relationship, particularly on the strategic front with the United States? How has that manifested itself in Egypt itself in terms of the tensions, perhaps, within the society there, or the challenges that the government itself faces?
Actually, in the past almost 6 years since the outbreak of coronavirus, and which is followed with the Russia-Ukrainian war and the disruption of supply chains, this imposed economic pressures on all the developing nations across the globe, and Egypt is no exception. Still, Egypt has a very strategic location, and it controls the Suez Canal, which is the major waterway and major trade route that 60% of the global trade passing by this area that is controlled by the Egyptian government. Egypt has in its border shares borders with Libya, with Sudan, with Gaza Strips. So Egypt is a very strategic key player in the region. This motivates the US or China to work very close with the Egyptian government and promote mutual interest between each other. Egypt is not drawn to the US or to China. It has actually what is called balanced approach of foreign policy, which means that it has a strategic relation with the United States from the security, political, military. Even the United States provide aids to Egypt since they signed the peace agreement in late 70s. And on the other hand, we all observe that the Chinese influence, not only in Egypt, but in the Middle East, has increased significantly in the past year, especially early this year. China, for the first time, succeeded to mediate one of the most complicated deals in the modern history, which was normalizing diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the longest rivals in the region, that fighting even with each other in a proxy war in Yemen. So the competitive advantage that Egypt possesses gives it the space to work with China and to work with the United States at the same time. But definitely China and US has different perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. US and its Western allies backing Israel and providing it with immunity to pursue its oppression plans. On the other hand, China's actually the major strength of China's foreign policy is that it's a neutral foreign policy, which means that in any conflict, it has a neutral perspective. It has a good relations with Palestinians government, and it has a good relations with Israel as well. It is one of the largest investors in Israel, and on the other hand, last July, President Xi hosted the president of Palestine and provided aid to Palestine, and this gives the strength to China to be a good mediator and neutral mediator in many conflicts.
Is Egypt part of the Belt and Road? Do they have Belt and Road? That might be something that we
Yes,
should mention.
Yeah. Egypt actually is a major part of the VRI, and even last month in Beijing, the Prime Minister of Egypt signed 16 MOUs with the Chinese government to facilitate the investment between both countries.
And I imagine with petroleum becoming potentially a growth industry for Egypt, I believe because of
New discoveries. Yes.
that this could in fact maybe complicate matters further.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, but also, there are many discoveries in the recent years, and Egypt works on deepen its energy sector and to be a major exporter. And now also one final thing I would like to mention, that Egypt positions itself as a green energy hub in the Middle East, in the special economic zone of the Suez Canal.
Especially given it was the host of COP27 last year, so
Exactly.
it's very much on that on that agenda. If I might turn to Georgia, of course, given the proximity to Russia and its geographic position, and of course now we have to look at it in the context of the Ukraine conflict, and I believe, of course, there's a move potentially to get Georgia as a member of the EU. I'm wondering if you could actually talk then about the balancing that Georgia needs to do, given that it is dealing with Russia in a very difficult way and delicate situation, a situation that I don't think many of us here sitting in peaceful Hong Kong are all that aware.
Well, thank you very much, Alejandro, and thank you for giving this opportunity. I am humbled to sit in between the representatives of the countries that have the millions, if not billions, of the population. I don't know how many of you can point on the map where Georgia is, but and I usually have to explain that Georgia is the country, not the state, which makes it even more difficult. Then on a second
Georgia
stage,
on my mind, right?
yes, that's a different Georgia. But then once we understand where Georgia is, then I have the question, so you're Russians. Then I have to go back and explain the history, which makes me very passionate about talking about Russia and Georgia history, because it's been 300 years we're trying to fight Russia's imperialism on our territory and expansionism. So, but I will take you back. I'll take you through the history before I go to the global south and the Georgia's role in balancing everything. We are in a very difficult neighborhood. Just to tell you that Georgia is a very small country in the Caucasus. We are the population of about 4 million, but unfortunately, the history that we are hearing today, what started in Ukraine, what is happening in Ukraine, it all started in Georgia. Well, it all started in China, actually, back in 2008. Do you remember the summer of 2008 in China? And what was the event then?
The Olympics.
Exactly. That was the Olympic Games. And you know what happened during the Olympics in Georgia? Putin invaded Georgia. Putin, it was the first international conflict on the European continent, which Russia started while everybody was watching the Olympics in China, considering and bearing in mind that people will not pay attention to what is happening in Georgia. So yes, on the 8th of August, Russia invaded Georgia, and we had 5 days war, which was then brokered by the European Union and the US. And unfortunately, after that, Georgia for many years had to prove to the international community that 4 million population Georgia did not start the war with the 142 million population Russia. Just imagine that for the last 10 years, we had to prove well, thanks to Russian propaganda, that we didn't start war with Russia. I don't know if any country in their right mind would want to start a war with Russia, especially back in 2008. By then, everybody believed that Russia is the army number 2 in the world. Now it's the army number 2 in Ukraine. So what happened in 2008 was the first attempt of Russia to see how far it can go. Unfortunately, what happened was that the pragmatism, or let's say the realpolitik, took over, and many countries decided to appease Russia and look elsewhere and continue the pragmatic relationship. So even though there were some countries in the European Union, especially the Eastern European, who were saying that, look, if we do not respond to Russia now, this will not stop. Putin is just checking, he's just testing the grounds. And Georgia was actually the testing ground for him, because he tried everything. He tried the hybrid war, and he tried the real military intervention. So after that, 4 or 5 months later, unfortunately, Obama's administration rushed the famous reset button to Russia. We know what happened. So everybody decided that, well, you know, tiny little Georgia, who cares? Let's continue our very pragmatic relationship with Russia. What happened was that Putin understood that he will go unpunished. And those who were preaching pragmatism actually helped him to strengthen his views that he will go unpunished. And after that, Putin decided that he can go farther, because for Putin, as you remember, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the biggest geographic disaster. After that, Putin wants and still wants to restore not the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, different geography, but still covers the countries in the neighborhood. In 2014, he went to Ukraine. Was there any response from the international community? No. Everybody appeased Russia, and they were concerned that Russia is killing people in Ukraine. But again, everybody continued the pragmatic relationship with Russia. Ukrainians and us, we knew what is coming, and also the Eastern Europeans. We were using every opportunity, every diplomatic channel, every international forum, every multilateral forum, where we would say that Russia is just beginning, and this is just the beginning of what Putin has on mind. So pragmatism continued. 2022 happened. That's when the community, the society started to realize that 2008 was a mistake. 2008 was when Putin just started, and he tested the grounds, and he decided to continue. So whatever happens now in Ukraine was just it is the continuation of what happened in Georgia. In this geography, Georgia is bordered by Russia on the north, we have Turkey on the south, and we have Iran on the closer to the east. So we are in a very complicated neighborhood. We are in a very complicated geography. And considering that Georgia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, actually the collapse of the Soviet Union started by the demonstrations in Georgia, because we wanted the freedom from Russian invasion, we wanted the freedom from Russian imperialism, even in the Soviet times. And unfortunately, one man that you probably all know is of Georgian origin, who created the Soviet Union, is not a great reference to Georgia, and don't remember Georgia with his name. It was Stalin. So he created the Soviet Union for Russia, but fortunately there was another Georgian, Eduard Shevardnadze, if you remember, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, who helped to destroy the Soviet Union and destroy the Berlin Wall. So Georgians participated a lot in creation and destruction of the Russian empire, let's say. So there is a lot of, feelings towards Georgia from the Russian government. After that, so the war in Ukraine is happening. We continue to try and preserve our sovereignty, but unfortunately, for Russia, their backyard, we are their backyard, so they still consider that they can behave the way they want to, because for Russia, some countries are more sovereign than the others. And the countries that are smaller, they don't have the right of the right of voice, and they have the right of the sovereignty. Not even the small countries like Russia, like Georgia, but bigger countries as Ukraine is. In this geography, of course, for Georgia it was very difficult, and it is very difficult to balance. But fortunately, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Georgians said, we are the part of the Western community, we are the part of the Western society, and we have it in our constitution that Georgia will become the part of the Euro-Atlantic structures. And only yesterday, the EU finally gave the candidacy status to Georgia, which is very promising, because Georgia wants to be the part of the democratic world, which is predictable, which is value-based, and which is not violating the international orders. This is the principle why we want to be the part of the Western community. However, Georgia learned pragmatism as well, and we are balancing the neighborhood the best we can. In 2017, China was never interested in our region until 2001, 2003, when China started to get interested in Georgia, because historically Georgia lies on the historic Silk Road. Coming from Central Asia, Central Asian countries are passing through the Georgian warm waters on the Black Sea. Back in 2017, Georgia signed the free trade agreement with China. And 1 month ago, Georgia became the strategic partner of China. We had the visit that our prime minister visited China, and it was quite a big and important event. Everybody would wonder why China would become interested in a small country of 4 million. Well, geopolitics and the location of Georgia, which in the absence of the alternative ways to access Central Asian countries, is one of the best routes for the access to the Central Asian countries, considering, unfortunately, that the shortest route was from Afghanistan, but due to the challenges, this is an alternative. China is building the ports in Georgia, China is building the infrastructure, and we have very close and pragmatic relationship, as we call it today.
Thank you. It's fascinating. A lot I didn't know because, frankly, the reporting is often lots of gaps in this information. Tell us about that relationship with China, because if you're watching American politics, right, particularly, say, I don't know if any of you watched the Republican candidates debate the other day. There is rhetoric about an axis of evil, a new axis of evil of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, what have you. They put them all in there. Now, you're near key players in that axis of evil that is from Washington's perspective. You mentioned Russia, you mentioned Iran, and now you mentioned that there's this kind of relationship with China. How does that play then? Because given that Russia and China do have this kind of forever partnership or whatever, without limits, as they described it, but yet you see opportunities, and Georgia sees opportunities in developing its relationship with China. How does that play then domestically in Georgia in terms of China, but you want to work with China, but yet China and Russia are very strongly allied?
Well, China and Russia have, from what I call, is the situational partnership. And we have only one evil that we're trying to get rid of, is Russia. So everybody else is the partner or potential partner. And we're working with everybody who does not come with the military means, who does not support the separatism. And so far, it was only Russia who supported separatism in Georgia, who actually is still it continues, and who is pushing the other countries to recognize the separatist regions in Georgia. So there were only few countries, with, even with Russia's so-called checkbook diplomacy, there were only few countries that recognized the Georgian separatist states, and those are Venezuela, Nicaragua, Nauru, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, and Syria.
What is it about the Pacific
Yes,
Island countries?
so-
We've got to get to you.
Because these countries have no idea that Georgia is the country, and unfortunately, we didn't have the diplomatic relationship. So now Tuvalu and Vanuatu know that Georgia is the country, and they reversed it,
Right.
which is not the case of Venezuela and Nicaragua. We need to talk about your neighborhood. Well, Syria is naturally, we understand why it is doing what it is doing, but. China understands what the separatism is, and China has never recognized the separatist regions of Georgia as an independent states. So with this, we have an understanding.
Right.
And China never came with the military means to Georgia and started the war. And economic diplomacy is what we will pursue with everybody, considering the national interests. I think every country is driven by the national interests, and this is where Georgia is standing.
Interesting. Now, since you just mentioned the Pacific Island countries, I was just reminded by that photograph, which many of you have seen, of the voting board at the United Nations on the resolution to the General Assembly about a humanitarian truce in Gaza. And actually, there were quite a number of Pacific Island countries that actually voted against it, which we won't get. We will get to that maybe a little bit later. Thank you very much. No, fantastic. Actually, one last question, because you're so involved in domestic politics, or you have been certainly. I'm wondering if you could just briefly update us onto the domestic dynamics that you've been involved in, because it's quite interesting. Just very briefly.
Yes. Well, as we say, there are no former politicians. You are either or. I was the member of the parliament. Well, till earlier this year, I resigned in protest of my government's policies towards appeasing Russia. But I continue. There is always the politics through other means. I mean, Georgia needs people who will work with the international community, who will raise awareness. At some point, of course, I will go back to the politics. But for the moment, I think there is much more to do from the other perspective, and engage international partners from the other perspective, rather than as the member of the parliament. I think I am freer talking about what is going on in Georgia when I'm not biased by the party politics.
Which is why you're here as an AsiaGlobal
Exactly.
Fellow. So now let me move to what I had called the most equal hinge, maybe, country. Because if you think about it, it's not for nothing that Joe Biden hosted Indian Prime Minister Modi at the White House, and then very soon after appeared himself in Delhi when India was hosting the G20. And then, of course, Xi Jinping didn't appear at the G20, and people reading a lot into that, particularly since India has its border issues with China. So, Prasoon, I'm wondering if you could deal with the same questions, really. Is that how does India, because India to some extent is the geopolitical belle of the ball. I mean, everybody wants to be with India, and if you think about the Canada's issues with India right now, the fact that Canada didn't get much overt support from many countries is largely because India is much sought after as a partner these days. So I'm wondering if you talk about that balancing act that India performs, indeed possibly so well, or maybe too well.
First of all, thanks for inviting and having us. In terms of choices, I think India make a choice of themselves, of their citizens, because from ages, like having a largest populations, we have like most of the Western countries has leveraged our resources. So this is a time of balancing or rebalancing. And as Winston Churchill said, never lose a good crisis. And this is the time of rebalancing. And India is keen on broadly 4 aspects. One, building the capability within home. And luckily, we have able and strong leaderships in all aspects in India now. Second, to regain our influence globally by engaging at various levels. Third, also to rebuild our economic might in terms of internal economics as well as external economics also. And also to think about, a future of having the largest population of the world. So I think this is a time where I think that's why you repeatedly chosen 2 words of choices. So I said India chose themselves. Second, about reactions, I think the best strategy of now in this multipolar world is not to react, but to work on your own strategies. Things are happening very fast, very dynamically. And there's one crisis and then suddenly there's another crisis, but you need to be very balanced. And in terms of US and Biden hosting our prime minister, so that definitely shows the growing stature and why they want to engage us. But India is well aware about the strategic dependency of US, and till now I think our leaders are very balanced. They are choosing things which are good for us, not all the things which they are offering, especially US. In terms of China, I think we are focusing more on actions. If you see, we are engaged in BRICS. India-China work together to expand the BRICS. We are in SCO, and we are also talking about expanding the SCO also. And if you see
The Shanghai Cooperative
Yes,
Organization,
yes.
just for those.
And in terms of broader international platforms also, in most cases, India and China takes their own stand. If you say the digital economy, in terms of data localizations and technology transfers, in most cases, India and China are together when you see the WTO in negotiations. But yes, because they are growing, not in terms of region, but in terms of as a global power, there are competitions. But Western media try to portray this competition as confrontations. Definitely, if 2 capable or 3 capable stakeholders are there, there will be competitions, and competition is good because as a society, Indian and Chinese, we are all grown up from a middle-class society where we are trained to compete with each other. And that's our strength, and that's why we are growing. If you see the predictions of whether it's IMF or World Bank, because there is a hunger in our people to work hard, to grow, to not only build their own future, but their countries and regions. So I'm very hopeful, and I think out of this crisis, Asian era will come back again, and people are working on that on the ground without reacting too much on this information warfare.
Now, many people think about India, of course, as this great democracy. And in some ways, at least in the West, in the United States, there's a casting of geopolitics as a kind of authoritarian versus democracies. I think Joe Biden likes to cast the world in those terms. Tell us about how India, though, in terms of being pragmatic and balancing, are there tensions when it comes to values? So just as an example, India not willing to condemn Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. It's very pragmatic because, of course, Russia being a source of energy. But does that create tensions in terms of, Indians wanting India to stand for sovereignty, for a democracy, for, how is it played in India, that kind of very pragmatic approach that for some, I mean, the invasion of a sovereign country is like a cardinal sin. So I bring in the Catholic term, cardinal sin that, geopolitics.
I think Indians are focused more on their own work, but I would say there's a double standards in the Western sides also. So, as our foreign minister says, especially Europe thinks their problem is world's problem, but world's problem is not their problem. So that's I would say the Western community also thinks like, because there were many terrorist attacks in India. Did anybody take a stand there? Did anybody ask them who is sponsoring that? India was repeatedly highlighting that in all the forums. Did you ask any questions to Chinese or US which side you are? So I think this is just a PR gimmick. So it should be like, if you say rule-based law, so the rules should be similar for all of them. So India is repeatedly facing terrorism attacks. There were a lot of repercussions within our land, but nobody was taking stands, so we took our own stand.
Right. Now, in terms of on the strategic side, given the border clashes between India and China, we've seen since then a kind of step up of India's participation in some of the strategic architecture that the United States has been constructing or organizing in the Indo-Pacific. Yeah. The Quad, for example, is a good example of that. Now, the Quad so far hasn't become a NATO or anything like that by any means. It's focused on on supply chains and such. But yet we've seen India participate more in naval exercises in the Pacific, not just in the Indian Ocean. Is there a sense that on the strategic side, at least India is shifting more to the United States in this regard?
I think this change in the geopolitics, and especially post-COVID, has awakened all nations to have minimal capacity and capability and deterrence also. So I think similar is the case with India. If you say they are talking with the US or Quad, yes, the US Defense Secretary right now is in Delhi for 2+2 meeting. And India learned of having too much dependency on Russia, specifically for defense supplies. So
military hardware, very much a
yes.
long-term supplier.
So I think now what India is trying, as we have our national mission of, say, Atmanirbhar, which means self-sufficient and self-sufficient capabilities in defense also. So these partnerships, we are talking more about building our capabilities. If you see, US gives our fighter jets engine. So we are not talking about being as a market, we are talking about as a manufacturers now. So US gave that engine so that India can make their own fighter jets, and not only for India, but other. So that's, I think, the vision and focus of India of building their own capacity. They are building their own technology also, not just depending on US or Russia or any third party. And that's why some of the, I would say, the arm or weapon building nations are keen towards India. But India knows this opportunity, and they are more keen on taking the knowledge and trying to build their own version.
That sounds like mastering agency to some extent, if you're going to a point of developing your own weaponry and all that sort of thing. I mean, in the sense, it's taking it to a different level, right?
I think when you struggle along, and there are nations who have, taken, I would say, misused your resources. So this is ages of our hunger and, perseverance to take or regain our positions. So I would say it's more of a perseverance from Indian side rather than just
Finally, before I move to Fiji, before we move to the lovely Pacific Islands, do you think that India and China are vying to be the voice of the global South?
not vying, they are.
But do you think that they are competing for that kind of leadership role, or is there any aspiration to have that kind of leadership
But
role?
this competition is good for global South.
Right.
So India brings in African Union to G20,
Right.
and China brings in some countries in BRICS Plus. So anyway, the advantage is going to global South.
Right.
So it's good.
Excellent. Anna, tell us then about, again, a country that we only think of as a tiny country far off, but a paradise, but yet it's become a very strategically important country. And so tell us about the balancing that goes on in Fiji, and because you are much courted these days by the great powers.
By both, yes. So this week in the Cook Islands, the Pacific Islands Forum leaders are meeting, specifically to discuss the way forward for the Pacific. So those of you that don't know, Fiji is part of 14 to 18 other countries. Historically, the Pacific were under British and French rule. And so when the Pacific Islands became independent, some are still territories of the US, like the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and some are still affiliated with other territories or protectorates of Australia and New Zealand. So when it comes to the geopolitics, when it comes to the level of agency or how to exercise agency, the Pacific approach has always been the wait and see approach. You know, unlike my colleagues up here, they're, landlocked, they're not as far away as we are. We're, on the islands at the global south as well. Even though we are not directly impacted or affected, we also play a role in terms of the relationship between US and China within our region, affecting other regions as well. One thing that's come out of the geopolitics is that it's actually questioned the regionalism for the Pacific, where the countries are starting to look internally and what's the national priorities. Before the Pacific Way, as we like to call it, and it's interesting, the theme of the Pacific Islands Forum this year, where all the Pacific leaders are meeting in the Cook Islands, is our voice, our choice, the Pacific Way.
Well, there we go.
Isn't that interesting? But 3 countries did not attend. Usually all the prime ministers of these countries come in. The Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Papua New Guinea did not attend. However, they sent delegations, high delegations to the meeting. Critics were saying that that means that they do not support the Pacific Way, or regionalism is coming.
Solomon Islands being particularly
Yes.
notable, right?
The Solomon Islands have given the excuses that, well, I wouldn't call it excuse. They've actually said that they're going through a cyclone. The Prime Minister has announced the after effects of the cyclone. Number 2, the Solomon Islands is hosting the Pacific Games, which starts next week. Or the following week. So they're busy with that. Vanuatu has also given the internal politics and the issues that they faced. One thing to note about the Solomon Islands, which the professor has brought, was that last year in 2022, they signed a security pact with China on security and policing. Last year, and this year, they announced that Huawei is going to build a communications tower in the Solomon Islands, and that's quite different. So when Biden, after the UN General Assembly, the USA had hosted the Pacific leaders in Washington, the Solomon Islands notably did not attend, with the excuse that they have domestic politics that they have to deal with. What the geopolitics and what relationships with USA and China has done is it's questioned the unity within the region, because the Pacific Way, as we boastly and always show off to the other countries is that we believe in dialogue, we believe in unity. So the group think tank is actually been shaken. Another aspect that's actually come forward is military and security. The US opened up embassies around the Pacific, 5 new ones this year. China relations, there's more ministers visiting, more exchanges. Google had announced also with Fiji is the cable that they are going to pass through New Caledonia and through Fiji. Within the Pacific region, Fiji is definitely a leader because of its location, because of the emerging issues that they're also facing. There's also sub-regions. There's Micronesia, Polynesia, and Melanesia. And so within these sub-regions, they've also got their own trade pacts and preferential trade agreements as well. And so what's interesting to see as an emerging issue that's come out as an after effect or as a side effect of the geopolitics and geocompetition is each country questioning themselves is what is their national priority? Do they choose themselves over the region when it comes to trade, when it comes to politics, when it comes to economics? And when they are agreeing to, say, cable, telecommunications, infrastructure, the Solomon Islands had China build most of its infrastructure for the Pacific Games this year. Nauru is the same. So a lot of these small islands, when they come to the Pacific Islands Forum, they're saying, hey, Fiji, you're big, but we matter as well, because in the UN we have that vote. And so some of these countries are starting to want to have a voice and trying to exercise the issue of agency as well. And with military, with security issues being in place with both countries, it'll be interesting to see as an emerging issue because the countries are so vastly spread out. They're closer to Asia, closer to the States, closer to Australia, New Zealand. It'll be so interesting how the national politics will be a game changer in the regional strategic plan. So today is the last day for the Pacific Island leaders to discuss the 2050 Pacific Blue Continent, the strategic plan that they're going towards. Australia is also serious about having discussions in the Pacific way. They've sent 70 people to as part of their delegation to the meeting in the Cook Islands. New Zealand couldn't make it because of internal politics and the coalition government that they're facing. Papua New Guinea couldn't make it, but they're all sending high delegation. I think, in summary, that's the question that most of the Pacific Islands are asking themselves. Do we exercise agency when it comes to national interest, or do we still continue to have a voice for the Pacific because we seem to be small and isolated?
So the kind of regional grouping, the inertia that you might get by being part of that grouping does affect that kind of ability of Fiji in and of itself, Fiji per se, to have its own, to exercise its own agency. It's a difficulty. What about Australia? Because, Australia and New Zealand to a less extent, but Australia looms very large in the region. And of course, there are those who say, well, Australia is simply Washington's deputy in the region. I mean, but we've seen just in the last few days with the visit of Prime Minister Albanese to Beijing, yep. a kind of master class to some extent, as some are saying, of the balancing, that he's pulled it off. In fact, I think in Ottawa there's a lot of Canberra envy at the moment at their ability to kind of get their prime minister to Beijing. I don't think our prime minister is likely to visit Beijing anytime soon. Canada is what I mean. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that, because the dynamics in the region are very important, as they are in all the countries that we've been talking about.
Yes. Fiji has always enjoyed a great relationship with Australia. We look to Australia, the US, as one of our major trading partners. Australia has always been like the big brother, as you call it. We're so intertwined, not only in culture, in relationships, in trade, but also in strategic law enforcement alliances because of the marine and border issues that plagues the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean is so wide that no country can really police its own maritime borders. And so we look to Australia for security in that. We've also looked to Australia for partnerships in law enforcement and in battling the big Pacific crisis, which is drugs, the fight for, on drugs.
Thank you. I would guess that then AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US
Yes, the
nuclear
pact
submarine,
that they've signed.
Fiji must have been looking at that and wondering how the impact for it on the strategic side.
Yes, and I think just like the Pacific Way, most countries in the Pacific, because we're not directly impacted, although indirectly because of trade, we'll wait and see. But just one thing that I wanted to highlight, the Pacific's contribution is the UN peacekeeping. So since peacekeeping has, been since 1978, Fiji has been really involved as not only mediators but peacekeepers. And I guess we're running out of time.
And indeed, China has as well. So I think Holly will indulge me in that we might go a little bit over, right? Yeah, anyway, we will. But questions? Questions from the audience. Please, don't be shy, don't be shy. I was going to cold call some of the Asia Global Fellows because it's their responsibility to keep the dialogue going. Cold calling, we can cold call. There we go. Yes, Sanjeev. Yeah. Could you wait for the microphone? Yeah, thank you.
Professor Reyes, I have a question for Mohammed. Mohammed, really like to hear from you about the current shift in polarity and how do you think that plays into the current economic situation?
Well, shall we take all the questions or?
Let's take that one first because I think that's quite a specific one. So go ahead. And
okay, definitely the global geopolitical landscape is changing, and it subsequently it changed the economic landscape on all the region, especially trade and capital flows. If you look now at the current ecosystem of the whole world, there is 196 countries. Only 46 countries are developed. The other countries are underdeveloped or developing nations. So it depends on the level of development of the country. It takes the necessary action. For example, most of the developing countries nowadays are suffering from high debt to GDP ratios that affects their economies and high inflation rates that reduce the purchasing powers of their citizens. And what they are doing is issuing bonds in the international financial systems and trying to guarantee more funds to pursue their ambitious plans, but they don't have economic muscles to extend in the global economic system. When you look finally at the developed nation, they have the economic muscle, the system is put in place, the capitalism system is working for their favor. So the world is rapidly changing in this decade, and I think every country has to readjust its policy to this change.
Great. Yes, please. And you're, sorry, I should make sure people introduce themselves here. You're Delfusa, yeah?
Yes, I'm Delfusa from Uzbekistan, and I have a question definitely to Nona, because we're the same, more or less same the region. So recently EU announced that Moldova, the joining of Moldova and Ukraine to the EU will be again the question, and they will be reviewing the application of Georgia to European Union as well. So do you think these notions of Europe, because it's long time discussion of membership of these countries to the European Union, will resume the power or hegemonic actions of Russia toward these countries, and will it also spill over other Central Asian or former Soviet Union countries, let's say?
2 days ago, there was a decision of the European Union, European Commission, which actually granted started the discussions, the accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova, and granted the candidacy status to Georgia. There is a lot of homework to do. You cannot join the club without being prepared for this. But it was a big step. It was a big step, given that things changed so fast that the process that could have taken decades is now going faster. I mean, it is promising for our region, because we want to be the part of the Euro-Atlantic family, given that we want to be a democratic country, we want to be stable, we want to have the predictable environment, and we want to be sure that our neighbor will not attack us out of the blue because they decide that they're stronger and they can. So this is, I mean, we have been the part of the Soviet Union. Once it was not our choice, we were conquered and we were forced into the Soviet Union. Now that we have a choice to which team to belong, I think Georgia made itself clear, and Ukraine and Moldova as well, that we are Euro-Atlantic, we see ourselves in the Euro-Atlantic family.
Great. Now, I'm going to close by asking any more questions. We'll just collect whatever questions might be in there, out there. Please, don't be shy. Don't be shy. Anybody? Questions? I am looking at our fellows. Any questions? Okay, one more from Dilfuza, and then we can, we'll wrap up, right? Dilfuza gets a
you.
gold star for asking two questions.
Yeah, I'm prepared. I'm prepared. So,
Yes.
question to Prasoon. When we were in China, we heard a lot that a lot of global tech companies are moving to India because they have U.S.-China relationship. Do you think it will, there will be another tight relationship, or may cause a tight relationship between China and India, considering that a lot of U.S. leading companies moving to India, and of course it will affect to other smaller companies or smaller countries as well to look to India as another force, because some of the countries, for example, in Central Asia or other, other part of our part of the world, looking not to China and U.S. because we don't want to be in this battle. So maybe India will be another option for us to look in terms of political, economic, and other resource exchange.
India is an option, so I welcome you all. So about the companies, I think India and China, they are more busy of building their own tech companies rather than luring the Western companies now. If you see the trajectory of China also, now they have Huawei ZTE for the telecom, they are building their own chip, and then for the softwares and the basic things like most of the Chinese, they don't lose Gmail or Hotmail, partially thanks to the government, but by choice also there are some citizens which, so these two countries are working hard to build their own tech companies, and yes, their choices or priorities are different. China is focused more on hardware side, but India, as per the market-driven, working on the software side. But now India is realizing that other, especially the critical sectors, they should work hard, and they are focusing on this. But other aspect of India is most of these tech companies are led by Indians. So that gives also a soft power. At least we know how to manage these big companies, and most of the engineers, if you say the chip war, around 58% of chips are designed in India. So that was designing and going out of India. Now our leaderships are thinking, if we can design and do all these things, why we are not manufacturing it in India? Right. So that's like, again, capability and capacity building and being self-sufficient.
Just as an anecdote, my own experience, I have two iPhones for my sins. I have two iPhone 14s, one for use here that's assembled in China, and one for use in the United States, which I recently got, brand new iPhone 14. But the iPhone 14 that I got in the United States is assembled in India. Both designed in Cupertino, but one assembled in China, one assembled in India. The Indian one, just to let you know, is slightly lighter. I don't know quite why. Does that mean that there's less sort of spyware in the other one? I don't know. I'm not asking those. I'm not asking those questions. But clearly, the China assembled one is heavier, markedly heavier, I tell you, than the Indian one. Since Anna didn't get a supplementary question, I'm going to close by asking her one quick question: geopolitics in the rugby world. Yeah, tell us just very, very briefly, what is it like? Does geopolitics intrude in that world that here in Hong Kong we love so much?
So the Tier 1 nations and Tier 2 nations, those of you that don't know, the Rugby World Cup that just finished,
Yes.
that just ended with South Africa winning the World Cup. And they're celebrating now in South Africa. They defeated New Zealand. So most of the countries in the Tier 2 nations, which includes Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, they've been complaining that there's less exposure, less competition, that permanently disallows them from grading up to the Tier 1 nation. So World Rugby just announced recently, to show that they're listening, is that they are going to change the competition draws and the way that the games are played. Is that playing? Absolutely, because if you see the reflection on the board membership, the way the votes are, who the chairperson is, most voices that are announced, the budget that's also put in, and the programs in the countries, absolutely there is geopolitics in rugby.
And where are the United States and China in the rugby world?
At the bottom.
Well, there we go. There we go. Isn't that justice? Right, poetic justice. All right. Thank you very much. If I'm going to take one message out of this discussion, is that perhaps when we think about the choosing scenario, the pressure on countries, large and small, to choose in this kind of U.S.-China great power rivalry, that maybe we're thinking too binary, that there is a third choice, and that's to choose ourselves, as has been really echoed here. And how does that happen? And that's agency. How do you do that? Now, is it even possible to choose ourselves? That becomes another question, right? How difficult it is to choose ourselves. But it's probably a very important question that each country has to struggle with. So thank you very much to Mohammed, to Nona, to Prasoon, to Anna. And we're going to take a break. We'll resume at 3:45.
We have about 20 minutes. We have coffee and tea in the covered walkway.
Yes, so please enjoy yourself. But do come back. Don't leave. You're going to stay on because my colleague, Christine Lowe, will be moderating a session with a whole brand new set of fellows to discuss sustainability challenges in the Global South. Thank you very much.